You remember that there was a leak of a Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision that ended the complete farce of abortion as a constitutional right. Whatever one thinks of abortion, even honest liberal jurists, legal analysts recognize that Roe v. Wade was absurd and obtuse law. I mean, it just made no sense whatsoever. But they wanted it, and so they created something, a fabrication. And you're seeing, by the way, there's a lot of that going on these days. You know, men can get pregnant. They'll just say things that we all know are untrue, but if they have the power to enforce it, they will do it. But the leak of the Supreme Court decision was a massive breach of trust and faith from within the Supreme Court. And it's interesting that over the weekend, Justice Samuel Alito, I guess this was on Friday, Thursday or Friday, Justice Samuel Alito sat down with the Wall Street Journal. The headline that I think really gets right to it is that the leak, quote, made us targets of assassination. This is Justice Alito, who was the lead author on the Dobbs decision. And two things that come out of this. One is Alito is absolutely certain that what we told you here on this show, what had happened, and all of you knew, but people were trying different theories or whatever to try to muddy up the waters a little bit. This was done to pressure Supreme Court justices to change an impending decision with massive consequences for the nation. This was an enormous assault on what in many ways feels like a last line of or a line of last resort institution, right? If everything goes to hell, you feel like, well, maybe the Supreme Court can keep us from going completely insane as a nation. Now, that probably puts too much on the court, but that's how a lot of people feel about it. So Alito Clay, absolutely certain that the leak was done to put pressure. And by pressure, he means lunatics might come after us, and so maybe we change our minds because we're scared. As we know, there was a guy who said, I'm going to go kill a Supreme Court justice, who was arrested with, a gun, a knife, and some tape or something. He had some weapons on him. So that's something you have to take very seriously. He also said in this that he believes that he knows who leaked it. Man, I'll say this. First of all, because he knows the motive, we know that this is, without question, if he thinks he knows who leaked it and he's 100% sure of the motive, I think we're quite clear that we know that this is a leftist from within the court, right? Okay. And then beyond that, the one that keeps bouncing around in my head, do you think it's crazy that one of the justices may have actually leaked this?
Oh, it's such a good question. Here's the quote directly from Alito. I personally have a pretty good idea who is responsible, but that's different from the level of proof that is needed to name somebody. I don't, because he talks in this interview, Buck, in the Wall Street Journal about the fact that it harmed their working relationship for about a year and that they're just now getting back to some form of normalcy. So to me, I think it would be hard to get back to some form of normalcy if you felt like it was a fellow Supreme Court justice
instead of a staffer,
right?
You think it's definitely I think it's probably a staffer, but
I think
I'm not 100%.
The staffer makes sense on the context clues because he said it took about a year to get back to normal. For people out there who don't know, Supreme Court clerks typically only serve 1 year. So if this person was a clerk, which is what I've kind of thought for some time on the left in one of the justices who was on the left's chambers, that would in some way explain why you could feel better about getting back to normalcy. Because if you thought, okay, this person no longer works at the court, maybe you have a level of trust. I would also say I think it's unlikely to be a justice because there are many, and I understand Dobbs was a radical change in terms of the court's jurisprudence. Maybe you could say, oh, this is something that would lead to a radical result. I would reject that on some level because there are all sorts of what I would consider to be blockbuster Supreme Court cases that take place over the course of the last decade or so. And there were no leaks of those. So I think if it were a justice, it would happen more than once.
Well, I think with Roe, though, first of all, it's such a central part of the lib psyche in this country, and has been something that, so much propaganda has been built around. Oh, it's the constitutional law of the land and all that stuff. But even beyond that, I don't think they're in any realistic world going to get a different result within the next couple of decades on this one. So it's a long-term problem for them, whereas at least with some of the other cases, they could have felt like we'll get another bite at the apple, right? We'll find another way, if what are the biggest case? If Obergefell had gone in the other direction, let's just say theoretically, they would have brought another case and they would have had another chance. Roe for them, I feel like, was they knew they were never going to get this again, at least not anytime soon. So it was a little bit higher stakes for them.
Two things. I think the stakes are still, unfortunately, very high because in a 5-4 decision, which is why I said Justice Roberts should have joined it, there still is an incentive to kill a justice, especially while Joe Biden is president and he has control of the Senate. And I hate to even have to mention that, but Alito hints at it and talks about it. I mean, he says basically, Buck, in here that they have such severe protection now that they are driving around basically in tanks, and they're not supposed to go places without their security, and maybe that has gone on and on, but I don't remember the security being that significant. Second part of this on the Alito, there aren't actually that many people who could be suspects, and that's the part that's frustrating about the court not being able to find the leaker. In theory, if you are correct that it is somebody with left-wing sympathies, that narrows down the list even further. Let's say there, Buck, are 100 people who might have had access to this.
It's probably a lot less than that, but
let's say it's 100. Like even 100 is a relatively. If you can immediately cut almost half of those people out because the last thing they want to do is put an assassination target on a conservative judge, that narrows it down to 50. If you then can take out full-time employees, because it feels to me like it's unlikely to have been someone who has been there for years and years, again, because there have been contentious cases in the past. None of this is leaked. I think you end up with like 14 clerks who are effectively the targets here. And how can you not narrow it down and figure out who those people are?
I got some old CIA buddies who you put them on the polygraph, you'll figure out who did what, I think, real fast here. If they really wanted to know, they could find this out pretty quickly. And I think that at some level, even for Alito, there may be this sense of what is, you want justice and you want it to be known, but does it also then just take it into another realm where it's clear this was a left-wing Democrat trying to subvert and really destroy the court's legitimacy, right? I mean, a Supreme Court that would change a decision based upon threats against the persons in the Supreme Court, the actual justices, is no longer an institution that anybody would trust or have any faith in whatsoever, right? It's a joke at that point. I mean, it's a sad joke. So I just wonder if they really feel like, I'm talking about now the people that work in the Supreme Court, would they rather just kind of let it go at this point? Because they don't want, do you think they all want to know? We all know it's a Democrat. We all know it's someone who voted for Joe Biden. We all know it's a leftist. We all know it's someone who thinks you should abort babies for all 9 months of a pregnancy because that's a great thing to do. We all know that. But if it's a person and it's clear and there's no more plausible deniability of the political attempt here to encourage a hit on a Supreme Court justice from one side of the political aisle, do you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm just not sure that they all even really want to know.
I think we should. I think we should know it.
I want to know,
but
I'm saying I don't think they want to know.
Even for the court, because we talked about it, I didn't think that it was talked about enough, and Alito directly addresses it. This was effectively a call to arms and a suggestion that you commit an assassination. Because and this is why I said as soon as the leak came out, they needed to go ahead and release this opinion. Because and I think a lot of people still don't know this, until the opinion is released, the law doesn't change. So effectively, this leaker provided 6 weeks for someone to try to kill a justice. And if you think, oh, that's an exaggeration, somebody flew cross country, showed up outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house to try to kill a justice. And unfortunately, Buck, that incentive is still there because think about what would happen if a justice got assassinated on the right in this country. Joe Biden right now would get to nominate a replacement, and the United States Senate would seat that replacement, presuming they could somehow get Dianne Feinstein and get her back onto Capitol Hill to be able to push this through. So not only is there a direct incentive for assassination, Democrats would benefit because you think Joe Biden would say, oh, we're going to refuse to seat someone. I think he would still seat someone. And then the law on Dobbs would theoretically flip back.
Well, they would need to have a case.
Which they would easily do. I'm telling you. They would, if they're, and I hate to even have to put it out there.
If they make abortion federal law again after making abortion not federal law within a couple of years, I mean, you're right, they could do it, but I mean, it just would make the Supreme Court looks like an absolute political hatchet job.
Do you think the left would say,
no,
they would do it?
They would do it if they could.
Which is why I hammered home, and I'm still disappointed he didn't do it. As soon as he knew it was 5-4, to me, the biggest failure of John Roberts' regime is he should have signed on and made it 6-3.
Well, John Roberts has made it a point to, I would argue, at the expense of law, courage, and decency, protect the institution of the Supreme Court as something that is in itself its own good, right? We need to protect the institutional integrity of the court. And in doing so, he has actually played into leftist hands and just encouraged the mob of lunatics.
Yes.
So I think he's
actually
honestly,
done, Buck, the opposite of what he claims by not making it 6-3, because unfortunately, the situation that I just laid out, killing a Supreme Court justice, replacing them, and immediately getting a case where you could overturn Dobbs and go back to Roe v. Wade, I think would happen.
Roberts has been feeding the crocodile of the left and hoping it will eat him last.
And I don't know that's going to save him. I really don't. But if he truly cared about the legitimacy of the court, it's the saddest and most pathetic decision of his career that he didn't make it 6-3, because by not doing so, he actually kept the target on the Supreme Court. And that's sad, but Alito's discussion, really an important one. I'd encourage you guys to all go read that interview in the Wall Street Journal in their weekend conversation. Because I'm telling you, this story, unfortunately, is not going away.